Good evening. All right. Before I start, I want to point out this picture on the front here at the top, just to let you know that this is our demonstration garden at the Extension office. And it's really hopping around the first part of June and got new things growing in there. And the interesting thing about it is that they like to try to grow unique things, different unique things in this garden. So it's kind of an interesting place to stop by, like Saturday mornings during the farm and art market and things like that. But anyway, back to the particular topic. The thing about accessible gardening is that once you start gardening and you get it in your blood, you want to be able to garden pretty much for the rest of your life if you can, because there's so many good rewarding things about it. Number one, it's good for your health because you're getting outside and you're moving around and doing things like that, your physical health. And then also for it's good for mental health because the reward of being able to grow things and learn things while you're growing, it keeps your mind sharp, and it gives you a good sense of satisfaction. So that's why I think it's important to make it so that you can continue to do gardening, as you go on in your life, and that's not just for senior gardening. That's also for people with physical challenges. But before I get started, there's a little bit of housekeeping here I want to do. I need to point out that K-State Research and Extension and the Master Gardener program are committed to all members of the community, and we invite everybody to participate in all the programs that we have available. And so that's what this slide pretty much deals with. Now, here's the topics we're going to cover tonight. Okay. Let me get this menu out of my way. Okay, first of all, we need to define what accessible gardening is. I want to point out a number of different gardening options that are related to this. And after that, we'll go through and look at different ergonomic tools and gardening equipment that will make the job easier while you're in the garden. And then finally, there's various tips we can add in here also that will just enhance your gardening experience and make it more enjoyable. Because the thing about gardening is if it becomes a burden, that takes the joy away from it, right? So we want to alleviate as many burdens as we can so that it's just much easier for you as you partake in this hobby. So let's begin with what is accessible gardening. Okay, accessible gardening is having a garden designed without any kind of barriers that enables people of all ages and physical abilities to be able to enjoy it, to be able to enjoy the benefits of gardening. So the whole idea is to either eliminate barriers or reduce barriers so that regardless of your age and your physical challenges, you're still able to get out there and enjoy the benefits. And as I said, there's a lot of benefits involved with gardening. So that's the whole point of accessible gardening. Now, accessible gardening is also interchangeably used with other terms like enabled gardening, adaptive gardening, senior gardening, and there's probably a few others, but those three I just named are very interchangeable with the term accessible gardening. So if you've heard any of those before, that's basically the same thing. Okay, so now tonight I want to address ways to handle these particular physical challenges. Now, these aren't all of them that people can have that want to take advantage of the benefits of gardening, but the ones I show here, I think, are very common among people, as they go through life. And so when I point out things going forward, I may not specifically point out that it pertains to this particular challenge or that one, but in some cases it will address several of them at once. But my whole idea was to just take a certain number of them together and address those, because when you think about it, something like this subject you could have a whole seminar on it, because there's so many different things that you could address. But like I said, what I thought I did here was kind of just get some of the more common ones, and down below there's very specific ones like wheelchair bound and low vision. And I want to address some of the things there too, for people in those situations to be able to partake in this hobby. Okay. So for gardening options, here's what you do first. You think vertical. You want to raise it up because you don't want to, if you can help it as much as possible, not be down at the ground level, because that you know, with the conditions I pointed out, the physical challenges, that makes it very difficult. So the first thing you want to do for your gardening options is to think vertical. In other words, to raise a garden up higher so that you're not having to go lower. Okay. So we'll start with raised beds. Raised beds are my favorite form of gardening. Okay. Because, well, for a lot of reasons, but let's just talk about for accessible gardening purposes. Now, ideally, if you can get your raised bed up to 18 to 30 inches, you know, that's really raising it up really well. Even if you did not have, say, mobility problems, even having a 12-inch bed is better than completely in ground. But for wheelchair accessible people, 2 feet to 2.5 feet or so is ideal for their being able to come up next to that raised bed sideways. I don't know if you can see my pointer or not, but they would come up and drive up right next to the bed sideways. And so you want it to be where when they're sitting in the chair, they're not reaching up or reaching down too much. It's as much straight across as possible. Okay. And one of the really nice things about raised beds is you can build these sitting ledges on them. And that is so beneficial to be able to sit on the edge of the bed and do your work. Okay. That takes out kneeling, that takes out stooping. It's just a lot easier on your body. Okay. Now here's some rules for raised beds. For one side access, in other words, if it were up against a fence or something, and you couldn't get it from all four sides, you don't want to go more than 2 feet wide, because it's got to be within a comfortable reach. But if your bed is out in the open and you can get it from all sides, then a 4-foot bed is perfectly fine. 4 foot width. Now, length obviously doesn't matter. You could go as far as your material takes, but these are two important rules. In other words, so that you do not have to strain to try to reach any part of that bed. Okay, now raised beds can be made out of a variety of materials, and I've gotten a question from people about treated lumber. Now, treated lumber is not a problem now. Back in January 1st, 2004, they up until that point, they had on treated lumber, they treated it with something called CCA, and the A part was arsenate. Okay, so it had arsenic in it. But beginning with 2004, they did away with that, and And what they treated it with was called ACQ. And it was water-based, is alkaline copper quaternary. And the other one, CCA, was chromated copper arsenate. But the point is, people are concerned about, well, can I use treated wood? Well, it leach into my crops and stuff. And research-based information has indicated that it is fine to use treated wood now. If you're still uncomfortable with it, you can always put a barrier around the wood inside your soil. So there's kind of a barrier all the way around if that still bothers you, but it's really not an issue anymore. Okay, now on raised beds, some of the benefits of it is you can control the quality of your soil because you're putting whatever you want soil wise in there, and as far as the composition of it, which is very nice, because if you have very alkaline soil in your ground on your property, you can bring in soil that will lower the pH to make it more acidic, into the proper range that makes growing a lot more beneficial. Another aspect is there's less compaction of soil because you're not standing in it, right? You're not walking all over your soil and packing it down. So keeps the soil looser. And with soil being in raised beds above ground, the soil warms up quicker in the spring, which will extend your growing season because you can start earlier. Raised beds also dry out quicker than in ground. So that would be one slight drawback because you'd have to water it a little more frequently, but that's from personal experience, that's never been an issue to me because I don't treat it any different in that respect. And another thing about raised beds is that they're very aesthetically pleasing. You can really make your garden look nice with raised beds. So in addition to making it beneficial for accessible gardening, you got all these other benefits too. So that's why I like raised beds. Okay. Now here's some more options of going vertical: trellises and vertical planters. Now, the best part about this is it reduces stooping, which we all know does a real number on your lower back when you're having to stoop all the time. And so trellises are perfect for vine crops, your indeterminate type crops that keep growing and keep spreading out. Because otherwise, if you have crops like that, like squash or cucumbers or things, there's, if you just let it grow on the ground, you got a mess eventually, and it gets in the way of everything else. Plus the fact that you're stooping way down on the ground to pick them. So trellises and vertical planters save plenty of space too, like all vertical gardening does. And so this over here on the right, it looks like a great way to grow your herbs, because these are shallow pots, and that would be good for that. And then the one next to it is another kind of vertical planter. They look a little deeper. You're less limited there, but you can still grow shallow rooted plants and things like strawberries in those. But anyway, this is another option for not having to get down on the ground and on your knees and down on the ground level. And so it's very accessible for people with less mobility. And now what I want to point out though on trellis planting is these vine tendrils, which I think are just amazing what nature does as far as wrapping around vines. Wrapping around the structure of a trellis just overnight or even less, how you can train those tendrils to grab onto your trellis, and that's how it obviously holds on and continues to grow up. But here's a warning about that. At the end of the season, when you have to clean up your garden, those little guys they hang on tight. So you're gonna have to be able to pull or cut those loose and then dispose of the vines. So in the sense that trellis planting like this is very more accessible as far as reach and such as that. You still have an end of the season cleanup job that has to be done. And I would suggest maybe you could employ little neighborhood kids or something to help you out in that regard. You can make a game out of it, and they can help you dispose of them. But in my opinion, that's really probably the big drawback of trellis planting, is just the cleanup. Okay, another option is container gardening. Now, keep in mind that smaller containers dry out faster. And when you use a container, you want to make sure that it's proportional to whatever you're planting, because you don't want to your roots to get locked in and start having a problem because they don't have enough room to expand. So just be aware that when you do containers for whatever you're growing, make sure it's sufficient size. And I believe K-State has publications that will help you in that regard as far as whatever you're planting, what size container you need. Now, as far as accessible gardening, it's been suggested that you also want stable containers, because if you have somebody with a cane or a walker and they might need to utilize that container for support, not constantly, but if they were to happen to have balance issues or such, you want containers maybe that will not topple over if they happen to lean against them. And of course, if your containers are substantial size, you want to have a container caddy with wheels, so you can move the container around and take advantage of the sunlight or shade as necessary. And as far as the type of plants that you would grow in containers, you want to make them bush type plants. In other words, they need to be they need to grow to a certain size and stop. You want them to be determinate type plants. And also it would be good to have drought resistant plants if you can find them. And K-State also has publications on those in regards to container gardening and suggestions. So plenty of good, helpful advice there. But container gardening, as I've been talking about all these other ones, is it elevates your garden. It brings it closer to you. And another option here is these hanging planters. Now, if you do this, I would suggest that when you water them, you use something like a watering wand or whatever, so you can get to them. And probably generally on a hanging planter, I would make those ornamental plants. Now, shortly here, I will also show you another way around that if you want to grow something else that you need to get access to. Okay. So, and there it is, actually. There's something called a pulley system on hanging planters. And I don't know if you've seen them or not, but I've seen some wraparound porches that have vintage pulley system planters, and it just looks so neat. But that's a way for somebody in a wheelchair to take advantage of, because this pulley system brings it down to a level that they can work with. And with a wheelchair, if you can get it down to 35-inch height, that works well for them. Okay. And some other things as far as container gardening, just to be efficient in your use of them. If you can, and your containers are large enough, you can combine the plants with plants that have the same needs. And that's just more efficient because they have the same sunlight needs and the same water and fertilizer needs. And that's what that means. And it's just an efficient way to grow it. And a big warning now on container gardenings is to never use soil from your yard. And the reason why is the drainage situation. If you use soil from your yard, you may be introducing clay into your container. And so it's always recommended not to use soil from your yard. Use a specific potting mix for your containers. and they have what is called soilless mix, and then also one that's called soil mix. And the soil mix would work better for plants that need better support, because the soilless mix is kind of light. And so if you have like tomatoes or anything like that growing, you probably want to get potting soil. But the key to that is there's absolutely no clay in that, what they're calling soil. It's probably sandy loam and just a small percentage of it. But it gives a better consistency to be able to plant vegetables that need more support. And I don't know if I said this or not, but you do need to have adequate drainage holes, because these containers need to drain pretty fast, because you don't want your plant sitting in water. Whereas if it's in the ground, it's spread out more, so you're not in just a real tight situation. And so that's not really an issue as far as drainage. But when it's in a container, you want to make sure it's got sufficient drainage. Okay. Here's another concept. It's called gutter gardening. And this is a good way, a really good way, actually, if you grow strawberries, to grow them this way. You can attach the gutters to your fences, maybe to a shed, to a deck on your patio, or like this on the bottom right, they have a hanging one. But this is another good way to grow shallow rooted plants, and make sure you just have enough sunlight and drainage for them. And like I said before, use potting mix, because this would be the same as growing something in a container. But I think gutter gardening is really another great option as far as providing the vertical option of growing and being able to reach it easily. Okay. Here's another one, table planters. Now this is very beneficial for people in wheelchairs or people that just want to sit in a chair. And the difference here is with a table planter versus a raised bed. A table planter, you can drive right straight forward underneath it with your legs, instead of sidling up against it like you would with a raised bed. And for that to work, you need a height of approximately 28 to 30 inches. And again, it should not be so deep that you cannot get to the center of it. You got to be able to get to the center of it from whatever point of access you have. These kind of gardens, if you can get 6-inch depth in these, that's doing pretty good. So you have to keep in mind again that you're looking at shallow rooted herbs and crops, okay? And as far as vegetation, or you can grow flowers too. That's a nice one here on the bottom right. And another thing to consider is putting wheels on them so you can move them around, make them mobile so that you can take advantage of the changes in sunlight. But this here, the table planters are most ideal for people that have less mobility, that are in wheelchairs or just sitting in chairs. And these two pictures are perfect examples of that. Okay, that's called table planters. And I believe Tracy included a link to a K-State publication where it gives instructions on how to build a table planter. And it looked like a pretty neat deal. And so, and also I'll back up. I think she also supplied publications for raised beds and container gardening also. And so you should have access to that. And they're in PDF form, and you can find them on the internet otherwise. Okay. Back to now that we get into the pathways. Here's what you want to do for accessible gardening for pathways. And part of this I'm keeping in mind is for wheelchair bound people or people with canes or walkers. Because now for wheelchairs, for their individual gardens, you want a point where they can turn around it kind of be kind of like a little cul-de-sac so they can turn around and change directions. If it's their own personal garden, about 36-inch wide path works well for a wheelchair. Clearly, it's very obvious. You want something that's firm, even, and non-slip. No obstacles, okay? And again, this is for people with either low mobility or people who maybe could have tripping issues or balancing issues. You don't want them falling down. And I say solid surfaces because some surfaces you have like gaps in between the stones, for instance, or the bricks. Well, you want to smooth those out because you don't. If somebody's walking with a cane or a walker and that gets stuck in a crevice on a pathway, then they could easily tumble over. So that's why it's very important to have solid, smooth surfaces. And if you happen to have pathways that are in shady areas, you got to keep in mind that sometimes algae or moss can build up due to the shade and the moisture. So you want to make sure that's clear at all times so you don't slip on those, because that's very possible. But down here on the bottom, there's two examples that, these are beautiful walkways, but for accessible gardening, they wouldn't work out too well because like on the flagstone on the right, you can see, obviously, number one, it's not smooth as far as rolling a wheelchair or using a walker or canes. Number two is nice too, but these little tufts of grass in between the stones could cause you a problem. So that's two examples of where it's probably not advisable. But the two up at the top look like they would be really, really well suited for what I'm saying here. Obviously, if you can help it, avoid steps in all cases for accessible gardening purposes. If you have slopes, make them very gradual, no more than 5% gradient. And sometimes your yard is such that you can't avoid it necessarily. And if you can, if you really want to help yourself out, provide handrails where the walking is a little more iffy, okay? And believe it or not, closely mown Bermuda or buffalo grass will work as far as the pathway, just because of the consistency of those grasses. But it won't work for fescue. Fescue is not good for accessible pathways. So I'll take a few minutes here and talk about options for visually impaired gardeners. The thing with visually impaired gardeners, and I'm not visually impaired, so I can't speak from experience, but based on research that's been done and such, here's some suggestions for setting up a access for people with that situation. Okay. When you have a path, and if the direction should happen to change, mix up the material texture so that they can get used to the fact that this material is different. So I've changed directions. I know where I'm going because of what this material is made of. I know what part of the garden. Do not make paths curvy, because if a person is visually impaired, they could be disoriented because the path changed gradually. Okay. Anytime it changes gradually, it's not so apparent to a person with low visibility. Border beds, you want to have them less than or equal to 3 feet wide. Island beds, less than or equal to 4 feet. So it's comparable to the rules for this for what was said on the raised beds. Now, here's something important. If you put anything on your plants, make sure it's natural or organic fertilizers and pest control, because visually impaired people use their hands a lot for touch. because they're using that sense as a way to make up for the loss of vision. So they're touching the plants a lot. So you don't want to have something that will have a reaction to their skin based on what you have put on the plants. So it's suggested to use these type of things, and it's more favorable towards skin. Some other ideas is to make sure the tool handles are different color, very contrasted to what the soil is. In case the person happens to drop it, it's easier to spot. Okay, if it were a brown handle, it's going to blend right in with the soil and it makes it more difficult. Also, it's suggested that the person wears an apron or a carryall to hold their tools, to keep them handy, keep them close by. Or if you have a certain storage area, always return the tools to there, because visually impaired people come to expect it doesn't work well when things are changed up, right? You come to expect things in a certain place, and that's where they should be. And so you get used to it, and that's where you can navigate easier, because you know where something should be. I've saw a suggestion as far as planting spacers, using egg cartons to space out planting if they want to delve into that, because then it spaces it out, and again, they know where something is going to be put, and using an egg carton will standardize it for them. And then obviously laminated signs with large print, it would be helpful too. Okay, now here's the deal with visually impaired gardeners is they obviously will depend on their other senses. Their other senses become more acute. Okay, so when you're building border gardens, you identify those borders by color and touch. Plants the same way, texture and scent. What you do is you group certain plants together, so again, you know what is where based on the texture or the scent of them. If you mix it up too much and scatter it, then it's a case of disorientation. Other things they rely on is wind chimes, moving water, and then the scented plants, and then they know where they're at in the garden. Put your bedded plants in consistent groups, same purpose. They're all there together, so they know what they're working with when they're in a certain part of the garden. And a helpful thing is just have fresh herbs and vegetables in large containers near the kitchen door. It's convenient, it's handy. For all of us, that's always been a good recommendation for herbs, is keep them pretty close to your kitchen so you can get to them easily. But that is just very helpful for people with visually impaired. Okay, here we go. To me, one of the biggest burdens with gardening is the watering part of it. Especially when you're pulling hoses and setting up hoses and fighting hoses, and that takes more out of gardening, in my opinion, than anything as far as energy. So ideally, now this right here, this panel here, the screen, is the ideal situation. If you had automatic sprinklers, or if you could set up soakers or drip hoses, you set them up once and they're in place. You don't have to move them around. This is the ideal situation. If you can do it, that's fantastic. In addition, you want to depend on mulching to reduce weeds and retain that moisture. Number one, well, that's double purpose there. You have less weeds to have to fight, being in a situation where you're needing accessible gardening, and you do not have to water it as much. So this fits right in with reducing the effort involved, as well as like I mentioned before, searching out drought tolerant plants whenever possible. Now, that's the ideal situation. If you don't have that situation, here's some other things you can do to make irrigating your plants at least a little bit easier. Number one, try to keep your water source nearby. And then as far as the spigot area on, wherever you're getting your water, for accessibility for people with less mobility, make sure there's stone or concrete around that spigot area so that they're not slipping in mud or getting stuck in the mud or anything like that. You want your surface around the spigot area to be a solid surface. Okay. Now, as far as faucet handles, that's another one for people with arthritic hands or weak grips. A really good workaround for that is to use what's called a ball valve on your spigot. Number one, you can push and pull this little lever with the palm of your hand. You're not grasping a faucet knob, and gripping it with the digits to your fingers. You can open and close it with the palm of your hand. And secondly, what I like about ball valves is they're less susceptible for leaking. Those kind of spigot faucet handles that you turn, open and close all the time, eventually they weaken and they start leaking. But these quarter turn ball valves are very, very good about not leaking. And that's just an added bonus. Another idea is to place plastic trash containers near your garden areas where you need to water, and use them to store water. In other words, number one, if we ever got any rain, we could depend on rain filling them up some. But in addition, if you could fill these up occasionally in locations in your garden so that you're not going back and forth with hoses and such or watering cans, and you can just go to there and dip into them and get the water you need. It's just another idea, just to make it more efficient as far as getting your source of water. But obviously another option is to use smaller, lightweight watering cans. That's a kind of a no-brainer when you can. Now, here's some more things. The hose factor. Like I said, that wears me out more than anything else in gardening, is taking a standard hose and having one of those kind of hose reels where you have to wind it up and you're turning it. And with every turn, it gets heavier because the hose is when you're pulling the hose back in, the hose gets heavier and heavier with each turn. And when you're pulling the hose out, it's the same way because the hose reel is kind of fighting against you. But if you're very careful in research, there are out in the market good self-winding hose reels. And I'm told they work pretty well. I gave this presentation a couple nights ago and somebody actually had one and thought it was wonderful. So that takes a lot of wear and tear off your body if that hose reel is self-winding. Another thing to keep in mind, if you're fighting the hoses or using hoses, and again, use lightweight hoses, as lightweight as you can find, but you also want to have what are called hose guides to protect your plants. And those can be homemade. You can take rebar and pound it into the ground and then put a nice tubing over it, and with a decorative top. That's what I did in my gardens. And you put them on the corners of your garden so that if you are pulling hoses, and this is again my least favorite option involved, but the hoses don't go running over your plants. And of course, watering wands are good for not only for reaching up high, like is in this picture, but horizontally, if you're watering your garden, you can reach into for instance, your raised beds and such, and you can reach across, and you can be more direct with where you're placing your water, because if we don't want to splash the foliage of our plants with the soil and such when we're watering. We want to be more careful about how our plants are being watered. So a water wand can give you more direct access to where you want to place that water. And so that's kind of a nice thing to have also. Here's two more options. Really trying to make it easier for you on this watering with hoses, especially. If you can, another way to utilize your hose is to get a hose splitter, and then you go 2 ways, and then you're not moving it as often. So the hose splitter goes into 1 point and then branches out into 2. And now this last option here is really, really neat. And I would suggest you would go out to like YouTube and look at demonstrations on it, because if you choose the right ones carefully, in other words, solid brass, or what's called anodized aluminum, well made. I'll try to explain this. What it does is you connect it to your one connector to your house, and the other connector goes to whatever you're using on the other end of your hose. One-time connection. And then you take the other part of the hose and you push it into that connection. You're not constantly tightening hoses and trying to thread them. And that can be another burdensome factor, is trying to get that thread on right. You do it one time, and then what you do is you take the other connection and you snap it into either the spigot side or the your device side, and it works kind of like an air gun if you would see at a car repair shop. It just snaps in and you're ready to go. And they even have the kind where they have a shut-off valve on the side that's associated with your watering device. Because you know what happened if you did not have that shut-off valve, you pop the hose connection off and the water starts spraying everywhere. Well, this is pretty cool because it has a built-in shut-off valve. So when you pull it apart, the connection apart, the water shuts off immediately. That way, if it didn't do that, you would have to go back to your source of water, the spigot, probably connected to your house, and go shut off the water, walk back, make your connection, walk back, turn the water on. So you're saving trips. So these garden hose quick connections are a really slick invention, I think. And I would suggest, if you have any interest in that, go out on YouTube and look at some demonstrations on it. There was one in particular, I think is like Mr. Fix-It Guy or something. I think that was the term. And that was really a good demonstration. But that would save a lot of effort if you had those quick connections. But I will back up a second and say that clearly the best way is to have a automated sprinkler or a drip system or such, one-time setup. But we don't all have that kind of situation. So these are other ways to get around it. And like I said, in my own personal experience, watering probably is one of the most tiring jobs of gardening. And I think most people would agree with that. Okay, now I was mentioning before going vertical. That's not to say you cannot still do in-ground gardening. It just depends on what your mobility situation is. But so if you still have in-ground gardening, and sometimes, like in this picture here, you want ornamental border gardens and such for looks for your yard. And of course you want those to be in the ground. So if you have situations like that, number one, first of all, is never have more than you can handle. Know your limitations as far as, size of your gardens. But if you still have in-ground gardening, you can sit in a chair and utilize your long-handled tools. And I've say the narrower beds, obviously, like I've said all along, are easier for reaching. I would say for your border gardens, you want maybe a 3-foot bed, no more than 3 feet deep. Again, use low maintenance plants as much as possible. And be sure to take advantage of mulch. Do not leave bare areas in your gardens. It's your ornamental gardens, because that just invites weeds. The more you can fill that area in with either mulch or plants, the less you're having to fight weeds. And I said watering is one of the biggest problems. I would also include weeding. Weeding and watering are the biggest, to me, the biggest areas of gardening that can really take a lot out of a person. So if we can do things to make those, to alleviate the difficulty of those and make them easier to you can't get around it. You still have to do some of it, but if we can apply methods to make those two areas simpler, you go a long ways towards making your garden such that you can reduce any kind of barriers in as far as your physical constraints. Okay, here's another option. And this is to keep from having to till up a garden. And because one of the things with ergonomic tools and such is vibrating tools can really cause a lot of stress on your hands and your wrist. And of course, with a tiller, you're talking about your shoulders, your arms, and everything else. So if you want to amend your gardens and such, and make them add more nutrition into them, there's a concept called no-till gardening. It's also called lasagna gardening and sheet mulching. Okay, you can do it either in ground or on raised beds. And the thing with this is it's kind of like what I call casual composting, because you're not trying to build up heat or anything. You're just laying out your carbons and your nitrogens like you would lasagna in layers. Okay. And the thing about lasagna gardening, which is it's a really cool concept, is it takes a while. So it's better to start these in the fall, so that by the time spring comes around, your garden area is ready. Okay. It's done, it's decomposing and such. But if you're interested in something like that, there is a lot of research-based information available online. A lot of universities have documentation on this. So this is just another way to set up a garden area with less effort to enrich your soil without having to work composting and other things in using a tiller. So this is just another idea. In all cases, try to make a shady resting area available in your garden. Okay. And if you look at these chairs, I didn't do this intentionally, but it occurred to me later. They're such that they're not so comfortable. Number one, that you can't get out of it. Number two, that you don't want to get out of it. And number three, they're just in areas where you take a short respite from your work, but you're able to cool off, and you're able to get up and out of them easy. I personally have a couple of Adirondack chairs, and I pointed this out the other night to the group, and they said that was not a good idea, because the way Adirondack chairs slope backwards, it's hard to get out of. I didn't think so, but I thought I was pointing out the Adirondack chairs are really nice if they have that smooth front on them. But bottom line is, just try to have a shady resting place available, because if you're gardening in Kansas, by the time 10 o'clock in the morning comes along, you're probably done for the day anyway. So you want to take a rest area. Have a rest area nearby so that you can just pace yourself. You don't want to overdo it at any time. So just keep that in mind, that you have some place nearby that you can cool off. Okay. in presentations, I like to have a Far Side cartoon because I'm a big fan of Gary Larson and Far Side. So I'm throwing this in here for a little humor. But the next category we're going to look at is ergonomic tools and gardening equipment, because tools help make the job much simpler. Good tools, good useful tools. So that's where we're going to go to next. But first, we need a definition of what ergonomics mean. Ergonomics is just, it's a study to try to make your work environment as efficient as possible in order to reduce any kind of, usually it's repetitive stress that causes long-term injuries. Okay. So that's quite an industry in like manufacturing environments and such. And it's also pretty popular in gardening too, as far as gardening tools. There are a lot of different options as far as ergonomic tools. Okay. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about different physical activities that you would do in a garden. And I've selected 6 of them. Okay. Gripping, reaching, cutting, kneeling, bending, and hauling. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to address these aspects of gardening and look at tools that will either alleviate these functions, these activities. Probably they will, let's just say alleviate. I don't think they're going to eliminate anything, but I'm going to address tools that point to these different activities we do in a garden, because I think these are primarily the things we do when we're in the garden area. There might be a few other things, but I think this covers it pretty generously. Okay, so we'll start with gripping. Okay, and with gripping, we start with gloves. Gloves are important, especially as we get older, because our skin gets thinner, right? And they get abrasions and such a lot easier. So it's nice to have a pair of gloves, but they got to be breathable, especially in our summers, because when it gets hot, you don't want sweaty hands from gloves that don't breathe. It's very nice to have dexterity, because you don't want to have to take your gloves off all the time to do anything. I know in the winter when I wear gloves, if I ever want to do anything, I have to take the gloves off to do it. No, that's with winter gloves. But if you can find a pair that you can leave on and still do things with your manual dexterity with your fingers, so much the better. So try to find those two. You want ones that don't slip, especially around the palms and the fingers, especially around the palms mostly, because that's the biggest area. You don't want any that puncture easily. Certain things we work with in the garden can puncture your hand. And here's another one you probably don't think about too often till it happens. You don't want short gloves that cause soil to fall down into your gloves and start building up inside next to your hand. So you want kind of a longer sleeve area on the glove. So that's a pretty key point. Okay. Ergonomic grips. You want contoured grips, what's called comfort gel and non-slip. Okay. The grips have to be cushioned to protect the wrist because of the way you hold it. Excuse me. Larger grips are easier to hold, but if you get it too large, then it defeats the purpose. So what you want to do is take your thumb and your forefinger and meet them, and then whatever circle with the circle there between your thumb and your forefinger, that's about the size of the handle you want for your particular hand. And of course, for the visually impacted people, brightly colored grips are easier to see. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay. Now, I'm going to specifically call out a a type of tool, like for this trowel, for instance, because this is called a radius grip, and they're very popular. But the way they work is when you hold it, the way you hold it is it causes your hand and your wrist to be in better alignment than just a straight grip. And that helps you to maximize, your ability to do the work, and it keeps it comfortable because your hands and your wrist are in alignment with each other. And this particular kind of material here is lightweight and strong. So I just felt like this concept of grip, again, is very, very popular out there. And for the purpose it serves, I wanted to point it out, just the way it makes your hand and your wrist work together. Okay. Here's another one, forearm cuff attachment. And the thing with it is your thumbs are up, straight up in a neutral wrist position, because that causes you to use more of your arm better. Because if your thumb is not straight up and it's sideways, then you get what's called like a chicken wing thing, where your arms start going outwards instead of being in close to your body. And when that happens, you lose leverage in your arms. Not only that, it causes more stress on your arms and your shoulders. So this forearm cuff attachment, it seems to be a pretty good idea, and has been mentioned in other university publications as a very viable and legitimate option as far as using like your trowel here and hooking it up. So it keeps your arm in a position that you are not causing stress on different smaller bones within your arm. Long handle tools. Make sure you get extendable ones. And the key though, and I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, but some of those extended handled tools, the way they lock into place is you just turn them. You just turn them far enough and then till you can't turn anymore, and that holds them in place. Problem with that is when you start using it and you are using your tool in an effort that goes the opposite direction that you did to lock it into place, it loosens it. And so you're fighting that all the time. So there are long handle tools that don't lock into place by turning, but they lock into place by having, you've probably seen them, the little holes along the way, and then the little piece of metal that pops up into the hole and locks it in place. My point is, without trying to get descriptive this way, is to make sure whatever long handle tools you have don't slip out of their lock position. Make sure it stays in that lock place, because otherwise you're fighting it all the time, and that just, again, adds wear and tear. With long handle tools, you keeps your back straight if you stand up, and you can also garden from a chair that way, because it takes advantage of the distance that you would normally have used by standing up. You can also garden from a chair and get the same effort. So long handled tools that are extendable are very valuable. Here's something else for people with weak grips. There's two types of grips. One's called a D grip that slips onto your handle and it gives you a bigger holding area. Number one. Number two, if you did not have this, you would have to turn your hand such that you're grabbing this part of in this case, a shovel. And so you're turning your hand and your wrist are not in alignment as such. And so that just puts stress on your wrist. And so, and having the bigger grip area helps too for if you have a weak grip. So this is a very good additive to put on any kind of shovel. And another option is these kind of shovels that have a built-in O-ring, O handle on the end of it. Okay, again, it gives you a larger grip area, because otherwise You may have a shovel that just, is the same distance as the shaft to the very end. So you're having to hold on to it, again, turning your wrist awkwardly versus your hand. And it's a smaller area to grab onto. Whereas here, you have a more of a gripping area. And so these help you give your wrist a break as far as in your hands too, if you have a weak grip. And if you don't have a weak grip, you can work longer with these kind of helpful tools versus. Okay. Pruners. There's two kinds of pruners that I'm aware of. One's called a bypass pruner, where your two blades, one's a sharp blade and it passes by the other blade, and that's how it cuts. And those are good for green, soft branches. This I can't really tell, but I'm thinking this is probably a bypass here. The other kind of cut is called an anvil cut, where the blade comes down and cuts on a stationary part below where it presses against it. And that's good for cutting old and brittle wood. With hand pruners, I think I would go with the bypass instead of an anvil, and unless you want to have both kinds. But a bypass would be more universally used. Here's another deal, and you cannot find these locally. You would have to go online to get them. But this right here, this handle here, is called a rotating handle. And so when you're cutting, actually, the way your hand works, this handle will move with your hand, and it will rotate, not too much, but enough that it makes it easier on your grip when you're cutting. And it's called a rotating handle. And you can find them online, and that's just another ergonomic feature. Also with pruners, you want to use what's called a ratchet mechanism, because when you're cutting and you don't cut all the way through, without a ratchet mechanism, you have to start all over from like the very beginning when you take another cut. Whereas with the ratcheting mechanism, you don't lose ground because it goes so far and it kind of locks it into place so that when you take the next cut, you're advancing forward. So I'm pretty sure everybody has seen the ratcheting mechanisms on cutters, but that's probably something you should always have, not only on your pruners, but on your loppers. And the whole point of all this is to reduce the hand fatigue, because this is a really nice one because it's got the soft gel grips. They got contoured grips. They're a little bigger because sometimes these grips are really small and they're hard plastic, and that takes a beating on your hand. So between the grips, the rotating handle, and the type of cut here, I think that this is a really good type of pruner to have. And it gives your hand and your wrist a break. In gardening, I think your hand and your wrist takes more of a beating probably than any other part of the body, based on what we're seeing so far. Okay. Loppers. Again, bypasser anvil works the same way. You got ratcheting mechanisms, and there's also something called a compound action, which increases the force. Now the deal is, if and this is what I've discovered, compound action could probably increase the force up to 3 times. But normally on a lopper, you're lopping maybe a 1/2 inch branch to 1.5 inches. And I think this might be, my opinion, I suppose, is overkill. And not only that, with the compound action, it's just adding more metal, more of a tool part to it, which adds weight. But you probably want the kind that are extendable, so that gives you more variety of more options as far as cuts. Different lengths from anywhere from 20 to 40 inches. And if the longer the handle you have, you want the lighter metal. You want either fiberglass or aluminum. So keep that in mind. The longer the handle, the lighter you want it because it's just extra weight. Okay, so that's your lopper options. Weeders. I hate to weed. My wife doesn't mind doing it, so I let her do that. But here's two options I'm going to show you as far as weeders. Again, I'm talking about this Radius brand again because it's got that great handle that curves and helps your hand and wrist. But in addition, this serrated aluminum blade here is nice because it's lightweight and it's sturdy in the serrated part of it. But I think this is a good option for weeders for short handle. Now this long handle weeder, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Grandpa's weeder tool, but it's been around since 1913. I do not have it. I do not have stock in Grandpa's weeder tool. I don't think it's even publicly traded, but I thought it was fascinating the way it worked because I saw videos on it, and it's a very popular tool. A lot of people use it and like it. The key with this one is there's no bending over, which I think we all would like. What you do is you take this tool here, center it over the weed, and then you tilt the handle down, this handle here, and the weed just pulls right up. And I think what happens is when you tilt the handle down, it grips it right here, but in the weed. But I saw demonstrations on it and it looked like it worked pretty slick. So if nothing else, it might make weeding a little bit of fun, but I'm again, I do not own one of these, but I thought it looked like a pretty neat tool to use. And again, the long handle feature of it is beneficial for what we're talking about here. Okay. And I don't want to just rule out battery operated type tools altogether. They're probably, well, they are good actually, but you just need to look to make sure they're lightweight, easy to use. And of course the grip, how you grip, it's important, and it's got to be comfortable. Otherwise it's not going to do you any good if it's painful to use. And one of the things that I think I mentioned it before is when you use any kind of device that's powered, if there's a lot of vibration involved, that vibration over time can affect your hands and your wrist also. So just keep that in mind. But if you do use one, what I don't end up doing is have a charged battery available nearby. Because I tell you what, whenever I use battery operated stuff, about 10 seconds into it, it dies. The battery's worn out because I used it previously. So then I got to go and hunt the backup battery. And so just to be efficient in your tasks, just have your other one nearby if you're going to use this, just so you don't have to go traipsing back and forth and waste time and effort, getting your backup battery. But I just felt like I had to also include battery operated tools because I think that they have a place also if you get the right kind. Okay, here's some other things. If you've seen a reversible kneeler seat, this thing here, you can flip it, you can use it as a seat, or you can flip it and use it to kneel on to do your work. And it's pretty handy, it's pretty nice, and it looks very stable. Actually, it is stable. Now, you can also do other options that serve the same purpose. Get a nice thick towel or rug to kneel on and use that. One thing about it is once you're down kneeling and you're using something like this, getting back up, maybe with this reversible kneeler, you would have an easier time of it because you have these things to help pull yourself up. But if you want to do a poor person's way of doing it, that's another option. And also, as far as a seat, you could turn a $5-gallon bucket over and sit on it as long as it's well padded. It has to be well padded, obviously. We know what that would feel like after about 30 seconds. But back to, if you spend money on something like this, that would be an advantage, is to be able to get up from a kneeling position using these handles, and they're not overly priced either. So that's just another helpful tool in your gardening endeavors. Here's something else that probably a lot of people have. We have one at my house. It's a rolling garden work seat, and we use it a lot. Thing is, you don't have to spend as much time getting up and down. And I would suggest, if you get something like this, get one with the handle. Mine stops right here. It turns and such, but it does not have the handle. And you kind of turn it down low here with the knob. So that handle helps. The seat swivels 360 degrees. And I think it tilts just slightly too, which believe it or not, makes a difference when you're reaching down. You always want to have air-filled tires, and the bigger the tires, the better, because it moves easier. Small baskets handy for storage. And I say find a red one if you can, especially those with low visibility. The red ones are just easier to see, not only in storage, but when you're out using them. So it might help so you don't maybe stumble over it if you can see it easier. Okay. Carts, wheelbarrows. Big difference. If anybody has ever, and I'm sure we've all done it before, when you have a one tire wheelbarrow, you're fighting that thing to keep it from flipping left or right on you. And sooner or later, it's the stuff in it's going to spill. So you want one with however deep you want it is fine to hold stuff, but you especially want large air-filled tires, dual ones, so you don't tip it. You want padded handles over here instead of having like two bars like a lot of wheelbarrows have. This gives you better control because you're more centered on how you're holding it. And the thing about this one is it unloads by tilting forward. And so that makes it easy too. You don't have to worry about it going side to side. And so this is another thing that's beneficial in the garden. Something you probably should all have in this kind of style, I think. Okay. Now I'm going to go through a few do-it-yourself types tools. This one, I think PVC pipe is so cool to be able to do different things with. And this is one example. He's got a seed planter here. So he drops a seed down, and what I assume, his is the way I saw the description. At the end of it, you sharpen one end of it so that you can push it into the soil as deep as you need it to plant the seed. You drop the seed down. Thing is, here he's got, it looks like a spacer guide, so he knows to plant the seed that distance each time. And then when you're done, you turn the thing over the way you have it sharpened on the end, and you can drag it over your furrows to cover it up. So that sharp edge serves two purposes. It gives you the ability to bury the seed as deep as you need it, and then flip it over, and you can just cover over your row of seeds. So that's a handy way to use a PVC pipe, 3 or 4 inches long, depending how tall you are, and probably a 2-inch pipe. So here's the deal. With gardening tools like this, you can come up with different ways to do things that make your job easier, which is kind of a fun way to do it too. It adds a little adventure to your gardening experience. Here's another one. For people with manual dexterity problems and issues, or low visibility, what you do is you take, and you can make this at home, take paper towels and fold them over and put, and you can do this at your kitchen table, and you can invite the neighborhood kids over or your grandkids to help you do this. What you do is you put drops of little drop of glue along the way, as however far you want to space them. Put the seed on top of it in the comfort of your inside home. You're not doing this out on your knees and your elbows trying to place seeds into the ground. And I find myself having done that a lot. It's very uncomfortable. So what you've got now is your seed tape, your spacers set up, seeds already loaded on it. You go out to your garden area, put your little furrow, drop these in here and cover it over. And then, of course, the glue will hold the seed in place. And this is biodegradable. And what the beauty of it is, later on, you're probably saving yourself some time having to thin out seedlings because you've gone to the effort in the comfort inside your own home of spacing these out properly. And that would really be handy on something like carrots, where you have to do a lot of thinning out, once you get the carrots start growing up. But it's very simple. And the point is, it's another do-it-yourself type thing that's cheap to do. It helps save time out in the garden, and of course, not only planting wise, but thinning them out later. So it's I think another neat idea. As far as the handles on your tools, take foam pipe insulation. I believe you, based on this picture, you can get different colors. Again, bright colors for the visually impaired. But what you do is slide these foam insulation covers over your tool grips. And so you got a cheap way to make your tool grips more padded just by getting these things, sliding them over your tool handles. So, and again, it's just another way to improvise and make your job a little easier. Here's a very important one, and it's very important, but honestly, I kind of fail in this department. But the thing with tools is, well-kept tools make your job a lot easier. Okay, well-kept, sharp tools that are not rusty make your job easier. So what you want to do is care of your tools by removing the soil with a bristle brush. Use coarse grade steel wool on any rust. Believe it or not, you would think sharpening tools wouldn't be that difficult, but the studying I've done indicates that you can actually defeat the benefit of the way a tool works properly if you do not sharpen it properly. So if you can, maybe once or twice a year, have them professionally sharpened, or study up on it and make sure if you do it yourself, you do it right. Okay. Now, non-rusty edges take less effort when you're using that tool, right? Another thing is you got to make sure your tools are clean, because contaminated tools can spread diseases. Okay. And then if you start spreading diseases, you just make more work for yourself. So it's always good to disinfect your pruning tools and probably your shovels too. And what you do is put them in a mixture of 9-to-1 water versus bleach, 9 parts water, 1 part bleach, to disinfect those tools. Another thing is keep the wood handles in good condition on your tools. And because you don't, number one, you don't want splintered wood handles. That's kind of rough on your hands. But another thing is, if you're going to cook, you can coat your tools with the handles and the metal, and use things like linseed oil, tung oil, 3-in-1 oil, WD-40 even. Anything like that, just to take care of your tools. And it's suggested that you do not use motor oil, because you're using these tools in the ground and stuff, and you don't want to invite motor oil into your garden area. So just about any other other type of oil will work. And be sure and store your tools in a dry, ventilated area. That keeps them from rusting as quickly and such. And what I would say as far as coating your tools, I would coat them just over winter, in the off season, make sure they're coated and so that they're ready to use the next time you have your growing season. Okay. Now, one other thing is to cover is ways to make the gardening experience more enjoyable, just through tips that sometimes just seem like common sense, but they're tips to keep in mind. Okay. Obviously, you want to warm up your muscles before you begin using them. Somebody, pitcher in baseball, doesn't just come in cold and start pitching. They got to warm up those muscles. Otherwise, great damage is done. So you just do some basic warm-ups of whatever muscles you intend to use. Here's a very obvious one, very key. Just pace yourself. Don't overdo it. Don't take on too much of a job at one time. And I think what comes in handy is just get a calendar, a regular calendar, and write down the tasks you want to do that day and the next day and the next day, and space out your tasks so that you're not doing too much of one thing in one day. So, it's a lot easier to go through the gardening experience if you're just taking your time. Don't try to accomplish everything in one day. Obviously, respect pain signals. I think we're probably all pretty good at that, but don't work through the pain, especially if it's something you're doing repetitively. Always utilize your largest and strongest joints. That's just kind of a no-brainer there. As far as this, always sit rather than kneel when you can. And if you do have to kneel, try to kneel with one knee only, not both. And one of the reasons for that is clearly balancing issues. If you're kneeling with just one knee, you have more stability while you're doing it. And secondly, it's easier to get up if you have one knee that you're not kneeling on. Okay. Just some of these just seem kind of obvious. Always, as much as possible, push and pull things with your palms, not your fingers. That gives your fingers a major break. And so whenever possible, just keep that in mind. Change positions frequently, because if you don't, you get locked up, and then it just makes it more difficult to move, and it compounds any kind of pains you might have because of that. Just like in like somebody would have in a factory environment, try to not do too much of a repetitive motion. And with ergonomics is really big in factory environments just because of this reason. Certain jobs in factories, they do the same thing over and over. And that just makes it very difficult. And so that's one of the benefits of ergonomics, is to do things to keep from doing the same motion over and over. This one's obvious. Limit your stooping, and limit doing anything where you're tilting your head back too much, because that puts a lot of stress on your neck. Stooping both your neck and your lower back, probably your whole spine. So just mix things up when you're doing things, and try not to do too much of any one particular motion. Okay. Here's another one. Do not twist at the waist. If you have to move, make sure your feet are moving in the same direction that you are moving to. Don't let your feet stay in one position while you're turning the rest of your body another position. That's another way that I think we all feel that one a lot, is the lower back and the pains in that area. Planning is important so you don't backtrack. I mentioned that what I mistakenly do with my backup batteries on any battery operated tools. I'm backtracking. So you're always going back and forth, getting different tools or what have you. That adds mileage to your feet while you're going about being very inefficient. So again, like I said, using an counter is kind of nice because it helps you plan what you're wanting to do, and it helps you organize in your mind what you need in the process. Keep your tools and containers nearby for the same reason. Obviously, I don't think I need to say that around here, but because we've all experienced it, by 10 o'clock in the summer, it's become too hot. So take advantage of the cooler mornings and do most of your work then, later in the evening if you want. As far as planning and such, don't do a bunch of heavy tasks on the same day. Space them out. And again, pace yourself. Carry materials close to your body. Don't let your arms flail out from your body, because then you lost leverage. You've put tremendous stress on your shoulders, your back, your arms, pretty much your whole body if you're carrying things that are too heavy and it's not close to your body. I think I mentioned this before. Believe it or not, vibrations have an effect on your hands and wrists. And for an extreme example, this is an extreme one, is if you were to use a chainsaw frequently, that vibration over time has an effect on you in that regard. Stay hydrated, clearly, because that keeps you healthy, and you don't get lightheaded and have to stop doing what you're doing sooner than you would have wanted to. And again, that goes without saying, stay hydrated. And we know that in this part of the country. All right. So having said all that, here's the key takeaways from all this. Okay. Raise up the garden areas where possible. Eliminate any tripping hazards. And I don't mean just things laying across the path, but the path itself, especially if you're using a walker or a cane, because you could get caught in the path itself. So just be cognizant of that. Be very efficient in your movement. Okay. It's amazing when you stop and think about what you do. There's a lot of excess movement that maybe we could cut corners on and do less of by just thinking about what we want to do and plan accordingly. Okay. Use your larger muscles and joints. They can hold up better. Limit repetitive motions. That's a big, like I said, that's a big factor in ergonomics itself, because repetitive motions end up causing long-term injury. Okay. That's what causes the chronic type injuries is doing something repetitively too long. So mix things up. Try to find low maintenance plants whenever possible. And as I said before, the better maintained tools make the job a whole lot easier. And that not only in gardening, but in anything that requires tools. And now these final two things are, I think, kind of sums up accessible gardening succinctly. For accessible gardening, always pace yourself. And now this final one here, improvise, adapt, and overcome. That's a Marine Corps mantra. And when you think about it, these three things right here are all a part of accessible gardening. You improvise ways to do things better. You can improvise ways to do things better for your particular case. As you improvise and make, do workarounds and things to make that job easier, you adapt to it. It makes it you become that adapt itself. The word adaptive gardening. And like I said before, is interchangeable with accessible gardening. And then, of course, you're overcoming your limitations. You're overcoming the things that maybe would have prevented you from being able to enjoy your gardening experience to begin with. So I thought this summed it up pretty well. Just these 3 words here sums up what the intent of accessible gardening is. Okay. So I think that gardening should not be a burdensome experience. This is what you might picture as far as becoming a burden with gardening, but instead, gardening should be a happy experience. And a little story about this flower here. This is a flower that was in my yard, in my garden, and I forget what kind it was. I think it might have been a coneflower, but it looked like a happy flower. But I don't know if it was a GMO or not, but gotten a lot of mileage out of having this picture. But just keep in mind, gardening, if it becomes burdensome, it's game over. I mean, why do it? I mean, it's just, you're just beating yourself up. So the whole idea is to just keep in mind doing things that will just make it easier. And so I think what I've covered here hopefully will make that so. Now, there's a couple more things I want to do. A little more housekeeping. K-State Research and Extension has these other programs that are helpful for the public. You have horticulture, which is a part of what we're in here with Master Gardening. We have a Department of Aging and Medicare, food and nutrition, 4-H youth development, good for the kids. We have agriculture too. It's separately. That's more farm related, and we have an agent for that in itself. And then this is expanded food and nutrition education program, and the other one is supplemental nutrition assistance program. So they provide these programs too, as far as nutrition education and supplemental nutrition. And one more thing, we have a Master Gardener hotline that you can access in 2 ways. You can call this number, and we have Master Gardeners in the hotline room, 9 to 12, 1 to 4, Monday through Friday, so you can talk to them directly. If you can call anytime though and leave a voicemail, and the Master Gardeners will get back with you on whatever your question or problem is. And another option is you can email your questions or what have you to this address right here. And again, we will answer those emails and get back with you. So you have, regardless of the day or time, you can contact us in these ways, and we will always get back with you with the answer. And the thing with our hotline is everything we do is research-based information. It has to come from a university setting. It cannot just be old things people do that, you know, for lack of a better description, it used to be called old wives' tales and things like that. All the information we provide through the hotline is completely research-based information. So you can trust that it has been well thought out and it is legitimate information. And so I think that's it on my presentation. So I will now take questions.
Okay, Kevin. There was one question that I don't think that you necessarily covered with your material. It's the first one that was asked. Any suggestions for the best way to lay out raised beds using cinder blocks?
Okay. Cinder blocks. The best, the thing with cinder blocks is you would have to go to a a lot of effort to get them level. If that's where I think you're going with this. Otherwise, you're asking how to lay it out with the cinder blocks?
It says the best way to lay out raised beds using cinder blocks.
Cinder blocks. I think it would be no different. Just your length and your width. Make sure you know no more than 4 feet wide if you can access it all the way around. But with cinder blocks is, you have to start stacking them. Probably, I don't think one high probably would be good enough. So it would be a matter of applying some kind of substance to it so that it sticks together when you add another level. But the trick there would be just, in my opinion, is getting it level. I don't know how else to answer that one. Cinder blocks, I think, might have holes in the sides, which if I'm picturing cinder blocks right, might be less easy to contain your soil. I don't know. It can be done. I've seen cinder block raised beds, no problem. But that would be the only difference.
Okay, and then Susan asked, and I'll answer this one, will this material be available for future reference? We are recording this program, and what we will do is it will be posted on the library's YouTube channel. It could take up to a week, but it will be there. And the other things that I wanted to mention is, in case people have not been monitoring the chat, people have indicated some things that they have found helpful. Like one person uses a rain barrel on their patio with a short hose from it to water all their patio pots.
Yep.
Another person just described that they love the hose link that you mentioned. And another one said that they have the kneeler seat and they absolutely love it.
Yeah.
And so that kind of concludes this evening's program. I have actually posted a link to the survey in the chat. So if you would take time to fill that out, we would appreciate it. It is also available in the email that I sent out. I do want to thank Kevin for his incredibly thorough presentation. It was very informative, lots of good things to make gardening more accessible, which we're incredibly grateful for and is very essential. If you're interested in any future upcoming library programs, please visit the Wichita Public Library's website at wichitalibrary.org/events for a complete calendar. And with that, that actually concludes this evening's program. And we just want to thank Kevin again for his outstanding presentation, and then thank everyone who attended for your participation. And just have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.